Anyone who escapes from this prison will die instantly. There are no fences or guards around it, but the harsh wilderness surrounding it leaves the prisoners with no chance of survival. In Bavaria, in 1944, a young lieutenant named Clemens is at the train station, saying goodbye to his wife and daughter. Just before he's sent off to war, his wife tells him that they are expecting another child. Overjoyed, Clemens smiles as little Lieschen tugs at his uniform, asking him to bring her back a postcard. He promises he will. The station master urges everyone to board, as the train is about to leave. Clemens gives his wife and daughter one last hug before heading to the train. Turning back, he promises to return by Christmas. But things take a terrible turn. Clemens Farel is captured and, on July 13, 1945, faces a Soviet court, where he is sentenced to 25 years of hard labor in a prison camp. Along with other prisoners, Clemens is transported to the camp under inhumane conditions. The train cars are unheated, and there's no food or water. Clemens dozes off, leaning against the icy wall of the train, until one of his fellow prisoners wakes him. It's his turn to stoke the barely burning coals. With great effort, Clemens peels off his frozen clothes and goes to tend the fire. As this happens, the other prisoners are ordered to turn over to the other side. It's then that Clemens notices one of them has frozen to death. In Germany, in October 1945, a postman arrives at Lieschen's home with a letter for her mother. The girl snatches it from him and runs as fast as she can to her mother's workplace. She bursts into the church and hands over the letter. Her mother quickly opens it. It's a response from the Red Cross. Unfortunately, they have no information about Clemens Farel. Devastated, the girl turns to a statue of the Virgin Mary and begins to pray, asking her to bring her father home. As the train continues through the snowy plains, Clemens asks one of his fellow prisoners to explain where Cape Desneff is, where they are being taken. The man agrees and draws a map on the frozen wall of the train. Shocked by the distance, the prisoners realize they may never reach their destination. They'll likely die from the cold and hunger before they get there. Tensions rise, leading to a scuffle among the prisoners. But the train suddenly begins to brake, throwing everyone off balance. They've arrived at a station. Under military guard, they're unloaded, each given 4 logs and a small amount of food, and then forced back onto the train. When the train reaches the next station, it stops, but the prisoners are not allowed to leave the cars. They have long since run out of firewood and food. One of the former soldiers, clutching a letter from his mother, prays silently. Clemens advises him to hide the letter and not show it to anyone. The next morning, they are finally let out of the train. A convoy has arrived to transport them. As soon as the men hit the ground, they fall on the snow, desperate to eat it out of hunger and thirst. However, the Soviet soldiers won't even allow them that small comfort, kicking and beating them until they stand up. Then, in disorderly rows, the prisoners are marched to the camp. Along the way, some of them die, and the weakened ones are beaten by the guards to force them to keep moving. Finally, in December 1945, they arrive at Cape Desneff. At the same time, Senior Lieutenant Kamenev arrives at the camp commandant's office. He will be in charge of the camp's security system. The infirmary is full of sick prisoners. Dr. Stouffer is pleading with a female doctor to give them penicillin, but she refuses. Kamenev then arrives, announcing that new prisoners have come and there is work for the doctors. The men are lined up in rows, and a head count begins. As Clemens looks around, he notices that there are no watchtowers or fences. His fellow prisoner tells him they're not needed. There's no way to escape anyway. Suddenly, during the count, one of the prisoners collapses from exhaustion, and a Soviet soldier shoots him dead. The officer in charge orders the count to start over. He tells Dr. Stouffer, who is standing nearby, that this process may take a while. It's how they determine who is healthy and fit for work. The captured doctor doesn't understand why he was called, and the officer replies that it's to sign death certificates. The roll call continues into the night. Afterward, the guards begin searching the prisoners' pockets. A young man becomes very nervous about them finding his mother's letter. Kamenev notices his anxiety and orders him to be searched. The young man reluctantly pulls out the letter and shows it. The officer immediately confiscates the letter and orders the young man to strip naked. Clemens tries to give the man his coat, but the senior lieutenant forbids him from doing so. After the roll call, the men are sent to bathe, their heads are shaved, and they are given clean clothes. Then they are sent to forced labor, mining lead. Meanwhile, Catherine Farel refuses to give up on finding her husband. She goes to the National Committee for a Free Germany. However, they also have no information about Clemens. A committee member asks her not to lose hope, as they will soon be negotiating with the Russians again, and perhaps they will learn something then. In 1949, Clemens Farel is still working in the mines. During a lead mining operation, a cave-in occurs, and debris from the ceiling crashes down on one of his friends. Clemens rushes to help, but his friend is already dead. Suddenly, a Soviet soldier enters and orders Clemens to report to Kamenev. Kamenev, having read in Clemens' file that he is a mechanic, orders him to repair a generator. After finishing the repair, Clemens contemplates an escape. While the guards are distracted, he sneaks into a mining cart. The cart slowly rolls along the tracks but unexpectedly comes to a stop. Carefully peering out, Clemens realizes that he has been caught. After the failed escape attempt, Clemens is thrown into solitary confinement. While he is there, the officer informs him that escape is futile. The USSR has an agreement with the United States. If he manages to flee to Alaska, the American authorities will still hand him over. After this, the officer orders Clemens to be released from solitary. When Clemens is escorted back to his fellow prisoners, they are left to deal with him. Angry and betrayed, they attack him with brutal force. They beat him nearly to death before one of his friends finally stops the mob. Dr. Stouffer is sent to tend to the half-dead Clemens, informing him that the others were not fed for 4 days because of his escape attempt. He warns Clemens that attempting to escape without proper preparation is reckless. Seeing the state Clemens is in, Kamenev permits him to be taken to the infirmary. While lying there, Clemens desperately begs the doctor to help him, to send a letter to his family. But the doctor, with a heavy heart, tells him that the letter will never reach its destination. Meanwhile, Clemens' wife and daughter continue to wait for any word from him. Sitting at the table and staring at a world map, the little girl dreams of writing a letter to her father. She knows he is somewhere in Russia, but the country is too vast, and they don't have an exact address. After recovering from the beating, Clemens talks with the doctor, who reveals that everyone working in the mines suffers from varying degrees of lead poisoning, and each of them will eventually die from it. Clemens realizes that he urgently needs to escape. Dr. Stouffer tells him that it's possible, but they must plan carefully. They'll need civilian clothes, good shoes, a compass, food supplies, and a way to start a fire in 40-degree weather. Stouffer offers his help. That evening, during a medical checkup, the female doctor notices that Clemens has a fever and needs penicillin. However, Kamenev, who is observing them, disagrees and orders that Clemens be discharged. Realizing this might be their only chance, Dr. Stouffer tells Clemens to come to his room that night. Clemens carefully and quietly sneaks into the doctor's room. The doctor shows him a map, explains which direction to go, and gives him his clothes, a compass, and a loaded pistol. He also tells Clemens where to find a hidden backpack with supplies and food. Additionally, he hands him a tin can with an address scratched onto it. The doctor had been planning his own escape but learned 2 months ago that he has cancer. He asks Clemens to visit his wife and tell her that he died in February 1949 to 1950. Then he corrects himself, saying it's better to tell her he died in May, so she can imagine flowers on his grave. He advises Clemens not to head west, as that's where they'll be looking for him. Instead, he should go north, towards the sea. After giving his final instructions, the doctor suddenly hears a noise. Looking into the corridor, he sees Kamenev arguing with Dr. Pakamutova and hears a patient's cry. The officer is harassing the woman, but after she slaps him, she walks away. Dr. Stouffer heads toward the patients. Taking advantage of the empty corridor, Clemens slips out of the building. He finds the supplies at the designated spot and sets off. The next morning, the Soviet soldiers discover Clemens' disappearance. They burst into Dr. Stauffer's office for explanations, only to find him dead. He has taken his own life. Using the compass to find his bearings, Clemens begins his journey. Suddenly, he hears voices behind him. Turning around, he sees a sled team with dogs chasing after him. Fearing they're after him, he starts running. The sleds get closer and closer. Unable to keep up the pace, Clemens stumbles and falls, but the sleds rush past him. When he gets up and looks around, there's no one in sight, just the backpack he had dropped nearby. Back in the mine, the remaining prisoners are once again starved as punishment for Clemens' escape. They decide to stage a small revolt, refusing to work until they are fed. In an attempt to subdue the prisoners, Kamenev kills one of them. That evening, a patrol returns to the camp. They've combed miles of territory but haven't found the fugitive. The officer is furious. They've failed to complete their mission. In the commandant's office, the camp commander expresses dissatisfaction with Kamenev's performance. One prisoner escaped, another was shot, and to avoid making matters worse, he suggests Kamenev file a report declaring Farel dead. But Kamenev refuses. He's convinced the escapee is still alive. Meanwhile, Clemens continues trudging through the endless snowy steppes. At one point, he stumbles upon some tracks and realizes he's been walking in circles. They're his own tracks. Mustering his strength, he sets out again. He's run out of food and, in despair, begins to pray. After some time, completely exhausted, he unexpectedly hears a sound. Peering out from behind an icy ridge, he sees a seal. With trembling hands, he pulls out his pistol and shoots at the animal but misses. The frightened seal runs away. Determined to find food, Clemens chases after it. As he jumps from one ice floe to another, he slips and one leg plunges into the freezing water. After pulling himself out, he finally manages to shoot the seal. As he cuts open the seal, Clemens apologizes for having to kill it. After warming up and eating, he continues his journey across the vast plains. Suddenly, he spots a small tree in the distance. Not believing his eyes, he runs towards it and embraces it with joy. In the commandant's office, Kamenev orders that all stations be notified about the escapee. His assistant informs him that they've already alerted everyone within a 500 kilometers radius. After thinking for a moment, the officer decides to extend the search radius, reasoning that in 2 months, the man could have traveled much farther. Meanwhile, Clemens has reached the Siberian forests. He sets up camp for the night and lights a fire. Suddenly, 2 men emerge from the woods. They recognize that he is a fugitive German and offer to take him with them, warning that a blizzard is approaching, and he won't survive alone. Clemens refuses, and the men leave. The next morning, just as the strangers predicted, a blizzard begins. The wind is so strong it knocks him off his feet, but Clemens stubbornly presses on. Suddenly, due to the hurricane force winds, trees start falling around him. One of them crashes down directly on top of him. The men return and, pushing aside the branches of the fallen tree, see that Clemens is still alive. One of them introduces himself as Semyon and asks the fugitive for his name. Clemens introduces himself as Peter. After pulling him out from under the tree, they again offer to travel together, and this time Clemens agrees. Now, the 3 travelers continue their journey. By the spring of 1950, they manage to reach eastern Siberia. They build a raft and head towards the Kolyma Mountains. Clemens dreams of getting home as soon as possible. Laughing, Anastasy suggests he stay because their Siberia is beautiful. Their conversation abruptly ends when Anastasy notices rapids ahead. Clemens grabs the steering oar, and together with Anastasy, they try to keep the raft afloat. However, as they hit another rapid, a wave throws Semyon into the water. As he struggles, Clemens, without hesitation, jumps in to save him. By some miracle, he manages to reach the drowning man and pull him to shore. Meanwhile, Anastasy, abandoning his companions, simply floats away. After docking the raft on the shore with all of his friends' belongings, Clemens unloads near a small wooden hut. Meanwhile, Semyon and Clemens trek through the Siberian forests on foot. At the hut, Anastasy immediately goes through his companion's belongings and finds a handful of gold in one of the backpacks. After some time, the 2 men arrive at the same hut. Semyon is furious with Anastasy for leaving him to die. Entering the hut, they see that Anastasy has been rifling through their things. Fearing for the gold, Semyon quietly takes out a pistol, knocks Clemens unconscious, and then shoots Anastasy. When Clemens regains consciousness, he sees Anastasy dead and suggests they bury him. However, Semyon refuses, saying that the wolves and birds will take care of it. They need to keep moving. Gathering their belongings, the men set out again. Winter has returned, and the travelers struggle through deep snow as they make their way through the forests. At one point, Semyon says he can't go any further. He's too exhausted. Clemens offers to take his belongings to lighten the load, but Semyon, fearing that Clemens might steal his gold, decides to attack him. Caught off guard, Clemens tumbles down a slope and loses consciousness. At that moment, Lishin wakes up from a nightmare. She dreamt about her father again. Clemens wakes up to the sound of wolves howling. Opening his eyes, he sees a pack of wolves charging at him. Leaping to his feet, he tries to climb the nearest tree, but the approaching wolves have already grabbed his boots with their teeth and are pulling him down. It seems he's doomed to a certain death. But suddenly, gunshots scare the wolves away. Overcome by stress and pain, Clemens loses consciousness again. The Chukchi people find him. The hunters load Clemens onto a sled and take him to their nomadic village. There, they place him in one of their yurts and nurse him back to health, giving him various remedies, performing shamanic rituals, and reading prayers over him. When he recovers, Clemens meets his rescuers. One of them is a young woman named Irina, who falls in love with him and stays by his side. Meanwhile, Kamenev arrives at one of the command posts. He's been informed that they've caught a fugitive criminal who was trying to buy a passport with gold. During the interrogation, the criminal mentioned a German, likely the person the officer is looking for. The lieutenant decides to personally interrogate the captured fugitive and heads to his cell. However, upon entering the room, Kamenev finds that the criminal has hanged himself. It was Seaman. A message about the fugitive German soldier is broadcast to all nearby settlements. One of the hunters who saved Clemens hears this information and immediately goes to tell Clemens, who is now fully recovered, that he is being hunted. Unfortunately, Clemens must leave. The people gather supplies for him, give him a dog for company, and the sorrowful Irina takes him to the plains. Left alone with the dog, Clemens continues his journey. By the summer of 1951, the suddenly lively dog runs off ahead and starts barking furiously. Clemens runs towards the sound and sees logging operations. There, he spots a man aiming a gun at Arjish. Calling his dog to him, Clemens prepares to leave, but the man stops him and orders him to approach. Hesitantly coming closer, Clemens is immediately captured. At the command post, he fabricates a story that he is a Baltic who has recently escaped from a camp and is heading to Chita. The officers pretend to believe him and send him on a train as a brake conductor. Unaware, Clemens gladly agrees. Feeling that he is closer to home, Clemens travels by train to Chita. Meanwhile, Officer Kamenev arrives at the Chita railway station with soldiers. The train starts to slow down, and Clemens realizes they've arrived. He looks out of the car and suddenly spots soldiers on the platform ahead. Deciding he needs to escape immediately, Clemens quietly slips out of the train with his dog and moves to the other side. Meanwhile, the train comes to a stop, and the soldiers begin to search all the cars. One of them spots Clemens, and a chase begins. Suddenly, Kamenev himself appears right in front of Clemens, and Arjish lunges at the officer. The dog sacrifices itself to buy Clemens a little time to escape. Though pursued, Clemens manages to jump onto a passing train. After getting off at a station, Clemens hitches a ride on a truck and heads into the fields. As he walks through small villages, he steals food from the locals. One day, while crossing a wheat field, Clemens encounters a rider. Fearing the unknown, he flees in the opposite direction, but the rider suddenly disappears. It's winter now, and he finds an abandoned hut to spend the night. There, he recalls his favorite poem. Meanwhile, in Germany, Lieschen recites the same poem in class. When she reaches the final line, she starts to cry. A truck drives along a country road. At one point, it had to stop because one of the wheels was flat. The driver goes to the back of the truck to get the spare tire and suddenly hears a noise. Moving a few crates, he finds Clemens. Realizing the danger, Clemens grabs some cans of food within reach and hits the driver on the head several times. In August 1952, Clemens finally reaches Central Asia. He wanders through a local market filled with brightly dressed, smiling people. Delicious food scents fill the air. Clemens is incredibly hungry but has no money. A few girls selling flatbreads notice his condition and send a boy to offer him some bread. Clemens eagerly devours it. Suddenly, he spots a church and decides to go inside. He's interrupted from his prayers by a Jewish man who invites him to his home. The man sitting near the church immediately jumps up and runs to the police station. At the house, the Jewish man tells Clemens that 2 of his brothers were killed by Germans, but he knows not all Germans are like that. He explains that to leave the USSR, Clemens will need a passport and an exit permit. For that, he needs a name, and Clemens chooses Peter. Approving the choice, the Jewish man suggests Clemens take a shower. Meanwhile, Officer Kamenev is speeding toward the city in Central Asia with all the speed his vehicle can muster. The Jewish man, after selecting a photo, heads off to sort out the passport issue. He tells Clemens to rest while he takes care of things. After some time, he returns home only to find that Clemens has left. He goes in search of Clemens and finds him in the church. There, he hands Clemens the passport and exit permit and explains his cover story. Clemens is a Latvian, which accounts for his accent, and he needs to memorize all the dates. The man urges Clemens to hurry, as the vehicle is about to leave from the main square. Arriving at the train station, Clemens presents his passport for inspection and notices some postcards. Remembering his daughter's request, he buys one and boards the train. At this time, Officer Kamenev visits the Jewish man. He knows the man helped Clemens, even though he has no proof. Suddenly, the Jewish man feels ill, grabs his chest, and collapses. Smiling at Kamenev, he admits to helping Clemens and dies, leaving Kamenev without any further information. Meanwhile, a patrol stops the vehicle carrying passengers and informs them that a mudslide ahead has blocked the road, requiring a detour. Clemens asks if it's possible to walk to the border and learns that it is, though it's quite far. Despite this, Clemens decides to proceed on foot. Eventually, he reaches the border between the USSR and Iran. After passing through passport control, Clemens steps outside the fence and takes a deep breath. As he walks halfway across the bridge, he unexpectedly encounters Kamenev. However, Kamenev does not arrest him. Instead, he steps aside and lets Clemens pass. As Clemens walks by, the Soviet officer says that he still considers himself the victor. Once in Iran, Clemens is once again imprisoned. He is suspected of being a Russian spy, although he identifies himself as Clemens Farel and claims to have escaped captivity from Cape Dezhnev. The story sounds so far-fetched that it might actually be true. Therefore, the Iranians decide to bring in his uncle for identification. In December 1952, Clemens is brought into a room where he sees his uncle. However, his uncle does not recognize him. The man pulls out a photo album and asks Clemens to answer a few questions. Flipping through the pages, Clemens sees his own photo. He had given it to his mother for her birthday in 1939, as noted on the back. When the men flip the photo over, they see the inscription exactly as Clemens described. In disbelief, they embrace each other with joy and tears. Clemens Farel is finally home. He walks down the snow-covered streets, his house ahead of him. Peeking through the window, he sees a cozy living room, a decorated Christmas tree, and his family, his wife, daughter, and son. Hiding around the corner of the house, he watches as they leave and head to the church. Inside the church, a choir sings Christmas carols. Lieschen's gaze shifts to the statue she had prayed to for her father's return. Suddenly, something makes her turn around. At the end of the hall stands her father. Not believing her eyes, Lieschen slowly gets up and walks towards him, throwing herself into his arms. Katrina, following her daughter, stands up and moves toward them. With trembling hands and tears of joy, she touches his face. The family is finally together again, reunited as promised by Christmas, after 7 long years. What do you think about how prisoners were treated in such a way? Did the country have the right to hold captives under such inhumane conditions?